All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamila Lodge. I'm the Communication and Development Director for BDC. Thank you for joining us today for today's webinar. I am pleased to have Kumi Bradshaw, owner of Firm Advisory, here with us today to talk about navigating COVID and his decision framework for business owners like yourselves, and how to navigate COVID and beyond. So we know Kumi. Kumi used to be a board member, and he's worked with us on several different projects, but I'll let him introduce himself formally.
Sure, I don't have a spiel. Really quickly, my job is just to help owners of privately held businesses with stuff that ties into business value. So that can be, in this particular case, talking about some of the things I've seen in navigating COVID and some of the opportunities to sort of better strengthen our businesses, are the things that help put a roof over our families' heads.
So, but tell us about Firm Advisory and like what your primary function is there, why you started the company, that sort of stuff, before we get into the good stuff.
Sure. In brief, a lot of the time people come asking for help with business valuation, which is just to understand how much, the basic premise, how much is my business worth. In the real world, what that ends up meaning is, I've got a couple of engagements now where I've got people who are looking to either transition out of a business, maybe it's a retirement situation, or it's looking to exit the business. It may be around actually turning around the business, or better understanding how to extract value out of the business. So really, while they often say they want to have help with valuation, at the end of the day, a lot of it ends up being around business turnaround. They need advisory help around turning around the business, around maximizing the harvest when looking to exit a business, that sort of a thing. And that's where I add a lot more value, quote unquote, to the client. And that's to better understand what the levers are in the business, understanding elements of the actual business model, where there might be opportunities to, without making massive changes, but make small changes that can have a material impact on what they're able to extract from the business.
So I think what you said is important. And I think sometimes, like you said, people will come to you when they're looking maybe to exit the business, right? So they want to sell the business and they're like, I need somebody to tell me how much this thing is worth so I can get top dollar for it. But a lot of the things that you end up doing, like you said, is helping them to understand what value is within the business and maybe what not. So my question to you is, when should someone contact a person like yourself or Firm Advisory? Is it at the end stage when they're ready to exit, or do you have the opportunity to work with businesses along or throughout the life cycle to help them understand their business model?
So I'll start with this. From my perspective, the very first thing a person should do is reach out to make sure they have an understanding about the financial underpinnings of their business. I'm just looking at the attendees who are here, and I recognize a few names. I'll actually call one out just to give her a little shine. Megan Nesbitt from Abacus.
Yeah.
Is you need to have, in my mind, if you have a number of employees, you need to have a good somebody who's able to provide you with transparency around the financial operations of your business. So an accountant or bookkeeper. That's critical. Without that, it's very hard to know what the impact is of the decisions you're actually making. And ultimately, in a business sort of framework, if you don't know what the financial impact is, and you can't really quantify things, you really can't make effective decisions. So you definitely need to have, and there are other folks out there, lots of other really good folks on island and off island who can provide those services. For me, I'm not an accountant. I don't come in and look at historical numbers. I don't come and put your historical numbers together. What I do is I come in and I'm better able to sort of bridge the gap between the numbers that are actually there and what's actually creating that value, what's actually creating those dollar figures, hopefully hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in your bank account.
Of course.
Millions, billions.
Of course.
And I'm coming there with a very practical lens. So I will look at things that fall outside the basic remit of GAAP. So for example, with GAAP, one of the things I think we were going to touch on is, I'll just jump immediately. One of the things we do like with GAAP is in the balance sheet, you will never see, and GAAP, just for clarification, is I believe generally accepted accounting principles. You will generally not see in Bermuda on the balance sheet an allocation for employee redundancy. However, we know that when you have extreme situations like this, or just general business operations, and if a business is sort of treading water or sort of on the margins, you need to, and you have, let's say, 100 employees or 50 employees or 20 employees, and we know what the Employment Act says, you start looking at a liability of up to as much as half a year of employee compensation for, in a liquidation scenario, right? So if you've got, let's say 10 employees, I'm going to use round numbers, makes it a little easier for me. Let's say you've got 10 employees and they're making $100,000 a year each. So that's going to be, what's that, $1 million. And, you have a company which is, you're sort of looking at your bank account, which many business owners do. They look at their bank account, then they say, oh, crap, my number's gone down from X to Y, right? Or it's gone down, oh, it's approaching 0 or gone negative. I'm in trouble. Well, it's a bit, the challenge is now that you're still personally liable for that, what ends up being $500,000 if you've had employees for more than 12 years or 13 years, ends up being $500,000 in employee redundancy payment. So that's a personal obligation. So you won't see that in GAAP. You won't see that on a typically produced balance sheet, but that's the type of thing that you need to be aware of. And so when I'm called in to value a business, I have to look at the business not just as an operating concern, but also under liquidation. What happens in certain circumstances when you might lose key clients? What does that mean? Can your employees be sort of repurposed or placed elsewhere? I have to look at the balance of fixed and variable costs. I have to look at the competitive landscape. And so there's quite a bit more that goes into it than the stuff that the accountants should do, and the accountants are critical to being able to run your business.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a lot.
Sure.
And so I'm thinking that, a lot of our stakeholders may be sole proprietors. They may have 1 or 2 employees. So they're like, okay, well, I don't fit into that 10, 15 employee category. So should I be considering these things? And I'll let you answer, should they? And then I want to start talking about this framework that you created, because I think it's key. It's an excellent document. And for those who are on, it is attached in the handout, so you can download it for your information. But let's just talk about what you mean when you say decision framework, first of all.
Okay. So I have a bit of alphabets, what I call alphabet soup, right? And we all love to use acronyms and fancy stuff, right? At the same time, I prefer to be plain spoken and direct. It's just easier for me because maybe I'm a simple guy. At the end of the day, many of us, despite whatever fancy stuff we may have, end up making decisions based on the inputs that are immediately in front of us. So, oh, there's a fire. Let me throw water at it. Oh, I need to unplug that. Oh, there's a car coming at me. Let me move out of the way, so to speak. It's being metaphorical about our business. The fact of the matter is that if we're operating our businesses like that, our businesses tend to have limited value because we can't actually focus on actually building the business. This is where folks talk about working on versus working in the business, right? Also, you tend to have because we tend to just be responding to immediate threats, we're not really sitting back and being strategic about our approach. And so we can't necessarily build a business that is as valuable as it can be, right? And value in a business ultimately is determined by our ability to either take economic harvest out during operation or take economic harvest out during a transaction. That's pretty much it. That's the only way we can really extract economic value from a business. And if we're not being strategic about that and sitting back and looking at some very basic things that we can do, then we're sort of expending a ton of energy, not just as far as our time, et cetera, but also our emotional energy, our stress levels. Anybody who's operating a small to medium-sized business in Bermuda, especially under today's conditions, I would say that generally speaking, you're going to have a whole lot more stress, right? I mean, that's normal. That's unfortunately expected. And so having a framework just helps us to sort of step back a little bit, take a deep breath and say, okay, let me start checking off some boxes. Let me start being a little bit more methodical. Because yes, thrilling to be less methodical sometimes. It's thrilling to be sort of seat of the pants, but that gets, that's great when you're, for me, that was great when I was 19, 20. Less great, that I'm a bit older. I prefer to be able to, because that'll happen anyway, right? But I prefer to be able to check some other boxes off. And so that's why frameworks for me are very important.
there's more at risk now. So when you were 19 and 20, you had the ability to, I guess, go into this thing, fail, and then bounce back. Whereas now you have responsibilities, you have family, like, does it matter how old you or the business is before you start looking at this decision framework or looking at your business in this way?
So it's like a yes and, but I think you should be looking at it right from the get go, because the earlier you start being methodical and being sort of, in my mind, more sensible about your approach to your business, make your business more robust,
Yeah.
And more, to quote Nassim Taleb, talking about things that anti-fragile or whatever. The more that you start looking at that stuff at an earlier stage, the bigger the upside is for you down the line, right?
Okay.
And there's no point in sitting around treading water and spinning your wheels for 3-5 years, however long you're going to be spending the energy, because that energy is not limitless, right? And you have to have some return for your hard work. And hopefully this is the type of thing that helps folks sort of take a step back, take a look at, what may have, I mean, when this was first published, I believe it was about a year ago.
Yeah.
It was intended to, I had seen some stuff coming down the pipeline. I'd seen some stuff that was coming from clients, and I realized there were a lot of people who were literally they were fortunate, they had businesses that run in Bermuda, but they were literally running their business day to day. And I was like, there's some pretty clear things that are going to be coming down the pipeline that we can predict. And we didn't, I didn't know I had no idea the COVID was going to be what it's been. And not just COVID, but our response from a national perspective, the economic response, shutting down of the island, all of that, the impact on the tourism industry, etc. But there were some, I did try to take advantage of what I could, what you can take care of, try and deal with.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start getting into this framework, right? So you identified in the framework two main decisions, right? That split off into some sub kind of steps that are needed. And so the first one is triage, and then the second one is go and no go. So tell me what you mean by triage, and then what kind of happens in that process.
Sure. So from my perspective, a triage situation would have been, let's say the pandemic, and folks are sometimes having to go into triage for an extended period, right? Triage is taken from, it's a term taken, again, I'm no medical person, but it's taken for me from the sort of the emergency room field, right? Where somebody comes in and they're bleeding all over the place, and we have to do immediately what we need to do to stop the bleeding, to just keep the person alive, right? So we do whatever we have to do to keep the entity alive, the person being the business, right? And so business for us, the lifeblood of business is cash. So triage for us is, let's just find every way we can to sort of address our immediate cash needs and find out what's going on, and find out, is this business either going to, is this, that sort of transitions into the go no go decision around, if I do everything I can, and more, and the business still isn't going to survive, then maybe I need to sort of take a step back and figure out that maybe I need to look at another path forward.
I know. I mean, hearing that, I'm sure some people are like, oh no, because this is, that's what they do. That's what they've always done. And COVID presents this whole new set of challenges that I think maybe people weren't ready for. So going back to triage, let's talk about some of the things that should be taking place kind of during this process.
Sure. So the immediate thing, so the day one triage situation should be, how much cash do I have, and what's my cash burn? Meaning, how many days of cash do I have to be able to survive, assuming that I don't have any revenue coming in or limited revenue coming in. And if I have enough of a period, then so how long before we basically all the oxygen is pulled out of the room? Because if I have historically a healthy business, but I just happen to be low on cash, etc., maybe I need to have immediate conversations with my financing sources. Maybe I need to have immediate conversations with the people to whom I'm going to have upcoming obligations, whether a landlord or, if I have employees, I need to let them know what's going on, or suppliers, because folks are much more amenable to having conversations, 10 days before you run into trouble than the 10 days after you've run into trouble.
Right.
Because Yeah, because you've been open and honest with them, and at least you sort of started to figure out a plan. It's not necessarily your fault. This is a circumstance that's happened to everybody around the world, you know? Maybe you need to go, I'm just reading off my notes, maybe from a bank loan perspective, you need to go to interest only, or look at having some sort of restructure. But everybody in the world's going to be doing that, right? Or everybody in Bermuda is going to be doing that, or many people in Bermuda are going to be doing that. So it's important to sort of to make sure you've had those lines of communications open. You start to address that stuff as fast as possible, because sticking your head in the sand is not going to get you into a better situation tomorrow.
Right, right. So, like, you know, some people are like sight unseen. If I don't see it, then it's not really happening. So, okay, we're going to triage. We've determined how much cash we have on hand. We may need a loan or overdraft to get us through the next step. What about, I'm going to use the word, I know you said stop, but what about pivoting? Like, where does that fit into this? Like, when you're looking at what you currently have going on and what you used to have in terms of revenue, would this be the opportune time to identify maybe some other way that you can earn revenue because your old sources have dried up?
Sure. I always laugh. We had a joke about this, about pivoting and entrepreneurship, or whatever these fancy words are. Pivoting is just survival. Figure out a way to survive. Figure out a way to survive. To me, pivoting is just survival. Entrepreneurship is just having something of value and exchanging it for value. That's all. It's have a customer. You know, for me, it can be really hard when we look at sort of our own sort of mental models of the world and the way we've always done things, especially when you start looking at businesses that have been around for an extended period of time, family businesses, etc., and who just don't adapt. They don't adjust. And it can be really hard when that's being forced on us, or it feels like it's being forced on us rather than that we're doing it ourselves. Maybe you need to find a different customer or a different way of getting to the customer. Maybe you've always sold through, fancy, a channel partners, a retailer or somebody else, a distributor, somebody else. Maybe you need to find a way to sell directly to the customer. Mm-hmm. Who is your customer? Maybe you need to find a different product. I have a business relationship who was, they provided services in gotta be careful, in a local industry. And, they were bringing stuff in and they were like, hey, look, I can say the industry is in the construction industry. And they were like, hey, my folks are stuck. I can't, this is during lockdown. I can't actually sell my products. I can actually have my folks going out there and servicing people in their homes. But I'm bringing containers in and I can bring in other stuff. So they brought in other stuff that needed to be, it's not their core business at all, but hey, it's keeping cash moving, mm-hmm. And they can sell it for a profit. And hey, if I have to sell oranges, I'll sell oranges. It's what it is.
Right. Right. Okay. So all of this is done under the triage state, right? Or do you do this once you decide it's a go or a no-go?
I think you're just trying to keep the business alive to be long enough to be able to sit back and have a frank perspective on what the future of the business may look like. So triage is all about figuring out your cash situation, get it resolved, get it addressed, chase your receivables. Receivables are really critical. Manage what money's going. Don't spend money on anything that doesn't have to. So the coffees and all that stuff that some fancy folks have. I drink water. It goes out the door. I drink Bermuda rainwater specifically. Okay. It goes out, goes out the door. Like you've just got to keep the business alive long enough to be able to then sit back and say, do we go for it or do we not go for it? And that oftentimes requires a lens that is not emotionally attached to the business. Mm-hmm. That oftentimes requires somebody who can just come from a pragmatic perspective and just say, here's what the runway looks like for the next 3 to 5 years based on the information that you're giving me versus and it may be positive or it may not be positive. And to be able to survive, here's what you may have to do. Okay. And do you have the skill sets and the attributes in your organization to be able to get there?
Okay. Well, Norman Robinson asked, should the triage concept be viewed as BCP of sorts? I hope you know what BCP is.
No idea. I'm not good with acronyms. You got it.
Norman, what's BCP? Tell us what BCP is, and we'll see if Kumi
Really
can.
plain English, please.
So I'll let him add to his question.
Sure.
But okay, so let's talk about the go decision. So we're going, right? We've decided we can do this, we can manage through this. So what kind of things should be considered? And should they be a mixture of business and personal? Like, how do you separate those things? What kind of things should we be looking at there?
So, the pandemic, these circumstances have made us very naked from an emotional perspective. And I would suggest that most of the clients and BDC clients are generally small and medium-sized businesses, which in Bermuda is every business just about,
Right.
every local business. And I would suggest that all businesses, or the vast majority of local businesses, the personal decisions are at least as important as the decisions driven by economics, right? Because if you're looking at for financing, you're generally going to look at having, I shouldn't use absolute terms, you're generally going to be looking at having personal guarantees, right, on any external financing from a banking institution. You are dealing in a small community where, if you drop the ball, your business partners, people with whom you're trading or exchanging goods and services, tend to be people in our community. So these are all personal decisions. So for me, for example, if I know that I'm going to struggle with something, it's really critically important that I take a look at my personal capacity and also how that's going to impact my personal relationships, right? And because you're also looking generally at small businesses where you will have, a very thin layer of management, or very thin layer of thin buffer between, many local businesses, if they've been formed in this generation, even if they've been formed in previous generations, will have an owner who at times may have to step onto the front lines.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just what it is. There are very few local businesses where you will not have an owner who, if everybody else doesn't show up, the owner knows they have to go in and
that's right.
Whatever they've got to do, right? Not plugging the toilets, but you know what I mean. And so for me, the personal circumstances of, am I healthy enough to be able to, to continue in this business, right? Do I have capacity from a time perspective? Do I have capacity from an energy perspective? Those things are critical, because if I don't, I need to make some decisions pretty quickly. And if I'm going to look to have a transaction, I need to understand as well that because Bermuda is such a small community, we have limitations on our pool of potential buyers of other businesses, that we are. Sorry, I have
Yeah.
a young one has just arrived.
Everybody's home working remotely, right?
The real world. That we are going to have to. We're going to have to figure out how we're going to be able to transition this business with a very small pool of potential buyers.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I know Norman explained that BCP is business continuity plan. So his question is, should the triage concept be viewed as a business continuity plan?
I think a business continuity plan is a more, so I tend to speak to more rough and ready situations. A business continuity plan conceptually is what you'll see in sort of large organizations with multiple layers of management. Yes. So yeah, for me.
Yes, but like a smaller, like rough and dirty. This is what we have to do now, as opposed.
Sometimes you don't have time to go to plans.
Right.
Like you don't have to, I don't know who in Bermuda predicted. I remember I had friends in Singapore, in Japan, who were telling me, look, we're locked down, and I did not conceptually understand
what that meant.
And I remember all of a sudden I was like, oh, I guess we've got to go and find spam. We don't need spam, but we've got to figure it out. What I mean? We've got to get bags of rice,
Right.
And how long is it going to last? All of a sudden, oh, this is multiple months. Oh, didn't realize that. Rice and beans, it's what it is. Survive, right? Because we don't know if there's going to be fresh food in the stores.
Yep.
So in such a situation, it's great to have a plan, but a business continuity plan generally will have to be updated on an ongoing basis, and They might have somebody, in a large organization, they may have people there to do that.
Specifically to do that.
Yeah.
So,
But if you're talking about your 10 to 20 person organization, you may not have that level of personnel. Your people
yeah.
are probably selling or creating whatever you're trying to sell.
So let's talk about that then, right? Because we're talking about our stakeholders who are typically, 1-man, 2-man operations, may have a max of maybe 10 employees. So then who should be going through this process? And do you recommend that they get help to kind of go through this process? And when should they be seeking help?
Sure, absolutely. So that's where your accountant should have been there to help you. Your first thing should have been, you should know, so you should have transparency to your bank accounts. If you don't have that, then, that's problematic. You should have transparency to what your cash outflows need to be. And your first call should have been and should be to your accountant / bookkeeper to say, how much money do we have in the bank? In fact, you should have control of your bank accounts, but how much money do we have in the bank? How much do we need to pay out over the next, whatever the period of time is? And how do we manage through that period? And who do I need to be on the phone to?
Okay.
Yeah?
Okay. All right. So
And who owes us money?
What you say?
Who owes us money? And who do I need to go and see in person? Because in that situation, it wasn't even about, back then, it wasn't even about who do I need to be on the phone to. Maybe I need to go and see them in person.
Right. Say, make a house call visit, right? Be like, run me that money, right? Okay, so we talked about the go. Now, what about the no-go? And this to me is a harder question because, this business, let's say, has been an individual's sole source of income. Maybe they have never gone through this process of looking at the business this way and understanding the numbers, understanding what their revenue streams are, which ones are good, which ones may not be so good. And now they're here, right? In COVID, in the middle of this thing. They've come to the decision where it's not sustainable anymore. What happens next?
So again, hopefully you would have reached out to your accountant should have a starting point, but then, as far as a viability question or valuation question, you could have reached out to somebody like myself to help you look at that viability as far as the levers. If you've already gotten past that stage and you've got a no-go situation, you need to understand, or I would need to understand, what does an exit look like for me? Can I sell my business, right? And I need to ask somebody external, can I sell my business? Not somebody who's going to fluff me or tell me what I think I want to hear, because it can take. I had helped actually a personal friend of mine exit a business, and they had a willing seller and buyer, and everything was super smooth, and they managed to exit in. The lawyers said it was. They were shocked at how fast it was, and it still took 4 to 5 months, and the buyer was paying literally cash. So there's no bank involved, none of that. And it still took 4 to 5 months in that particular situation. I've had other circumstances that a large business, local business with which I was engaged to help on the sell side, just from an advisory perspective, not brokering it. And that took 4 months as well, 3 or 4 months, I believe. No, 4 months as well. So you're not going to see your cash next week. It's just highly unlikely, right? Assuming you can sell it for anything. So what you're going to need to do, or what I would need to do, is I would need to have somebody external help me understand, can I sell it? If I can sell it, to whom can I sell it? How do I go about the process? As far as, how do I go about the process of reaching out? How do I go about the process of managing my vulnerability? Because I'm going to be emotionally vulnerable, right? Number one. So I may have seller's remorse or pre-seller's remorse. I may have, I can still hold on to this thing while I'm continually bleeding out. That's always the worry, right? Because if I hold on to it forever and it bleeds out, then it's not worth anything. In fact, it's going to cost me money, liquidation expenses.
So in that scenario, would you recommend just stopping the bleeding then? So if you determine that you are going to exit by selling, should you just stop all transactions at that point?
I have yet to see that work successfully. The reason is because businesses are like living bodies, right? If I don't know of a business where you can just stop transactions and everything just stays in stasis, because you've got ongoing expenses, whether it's rent expense, employee expense, just maintaining your basic. If you have physical physical machinery assets or whatever, maintaining that, and that'll degrade the value. So it's a hard thing. So the business owner, generally speaking, is still going to have to manage operating the business and putting sort of a brave face in things, while at the same time getting somebody external to help them. Because it's in my mind, I have not seen many business owners who have successfully exited businesses on their own, with and extracted maximum value while still being able to focus. Because you're distracted, trying to focus on your business, trying to figure out if you should even be exiting your business, how to exit your business, how to manage that whole process. You bring your own emotions to the table, which is going to make things challenging, especially with a pool of small buyers, right? A small pool of buyers. And at the same time, you're also dealing with whatever you may be dealing with at home in your personal life.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot. I mean, at the end of the day, you're like, okay, this thing is no longer making me money. So I would like to sell it, but in some cases, based on the valuation, it may not be worth anything. And what I'm hearing you say is that there is a chance that the business can be valued and you can identify whether or not it is worth anything. And if so, then you could kind of help guide through the process to actually try and get a sale. And then I want you to talk about, well, what happens if it's not sellable? Like, what is the process after that?
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to push back a little bit on one premise you just put out there, as far as selling the business when it's no longer making me money. My
Right.
perspective is that a business that's sold should ideally be a healthy business, because a healthy business that's generating an appropriate rate of return is going to have more buyers, right?
Right. Yeah.
Nobody wants your chewed up piece of gum, like, you know what I mean? So if you've got, well, you're not going to get a whole lot of money for your chewed up piece of gum. So
Right.
if you have a healthy business and it's generating a ton of money, but it may not be a fit for you because of stuff that be going on in your personal life, this is what we talked about, or your personal circumstances, or you may just have other things you want to do. That's an ideal time to exit a business. Don't, pass it on to somebody who could extract even more value out of it.
Right.
Because then they're going to pay you more for it, right?
I know.
Um, Go ahead.
I said, I know, but that would be an ideal scenario. COVID is not an ideal scenario. And I think that a lot of the people on the call, or some people now, are faced with this decision, not because they want to be, but because that's just what the reality is.
So I'll give you. So here's the funny thing about COVID is there are people who are actually doing very well.
Yeah.
Who are doing very well. I had a conversation with a small family-run business. They asked me to come in and have a conversation with them a couple of weeks ago, and they're doing better post pandemic. I'm not going to say what industry it is. And I have a personal friend with their business. They're doing quite well, and they've had to adapt and make some changes. But they've been very proactive about the way they've run their business, and they've been very lean as well. They have not had a whole lot of excess personnel. Their business models, are appropriately structured as far as fixed and variable costs. That sort of, so their break evens get a lot lower. The break even thresholds get a lot lower, and so while others have been suffering, they're actually doing very well. So there are folks out there who will come out of this even healthier and in a better position.
Okay.
I would suggest that I would suggest that folks who are struggling, if you have just the amount of work it takes to start a business, if you have enough of if from an arm's length perspective, somebody can honestly say this thing can still survive and this thing can still create economic value for you, and you still have the wherewithal in yourself to fight for it, then maybe it's worth making that go decision, right? But if you don't, then maybe maybe you have to make the no-go decision. And there's a fairly basic recipe once you have to make a no-go decision. If you have to make a no-go decision, then it's okay, how do we start to liquidate the business? That's what a no-go decision ultimately is. We have to kill the business, right? And how do we extract whatever little bit of value, or not always a little bit of value, but how do we extract whatever value we have to extract out of the business? So we have something at the end of the day, right? And so there's legislation out there as far as how you treat your employees, right? there are things that I would strongly suggest one does as far as how one treats one's business partners, your suppliers and your customers. Because again, Bermuda's a small community. First of all, it's just the right thing to do. Secondly, Bermuda's a small community, and if you've put on your cape and built one business, you're very likely to want to come back and do it again, right? And it's all about how we treat people, right? And so let's manage, let's appropriately manage how we deal with our suppliers, with our customers, and let's also talk to, maybe it becomes a time when, again, if we have external assistance, maybe talk to other folks in our industry, because other folks in our industry will be able to create more out of our business than we can at this time, because they may be in a different position as far as the amount of resources they have, the ability to last through the downturn, etc., or the new, whatever that means.
The new normal, all of that kind of stuff.
Normal, all that fancy stuff, right? And just to survive. And so that's really what that starts to look like from my perspective.
Okay. Well, Norman has another question. He says, within the no-go perspective, would a merger be a viable option instead of selling?
So I'll say yes and. So for me, a merger essentially means that I'm giving up my equity in exchange for equity in this new entity, equity or cash or whatever, or sometimes just relief. So I've been involved in, from an advisory perspective, in a transaction where it was a large local business, and yes, the short answer is yes.
Yes. Okay. And what that looks like? Like you have to pay for that extra information? No.
No, whatever. The short answer is yes. There's no need to.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to ask you, because a lot of what you're saying sounds to me like you have to, because you're making reference to the business as a separate entity, in which case this business would be a limited liability company or an LLC or something like that. So for those businesses who are operating as sole proprietors, or maybe regular partnerships with no kind of agreement in place, or registered agreement, I should say, does the same thing apply or not? Especially when it comes to being able to exit or sell and all of that good stuff.
For me, the first principles sort of hold true. I mean, there can be a bit more complexity that rises in when you don't have governing documents. And so documents say, okay, let's say we have multiple owners of a business and you don't have some governing documents, a shareholders agreement, a buy-sell agreement, what have you, that can get a bit more complicated. But that stuff can be managed with professional assistance, whether it's a lawyer, whether it's, your lawyers, your accountants, whether it's someone like me who can help translate all of that and help you actually, before you go and talk to the lawyer. But yeah, the same, a business is a business, and you're just trying to extract the most value you can from it.
Okay. So now I know that I would consider you a bit of a serial entrepreneur. Like you said, back when you were 19, you did what you had to do.
I was young.
Yeah, you always out something. And so I do know that you also have another business besides firm advisory. And I just want to ask if you would be willing to use yourself as an example to talk about some of these principles that you've shared today and how you're utilizing them, or whether or not you're taking your own advice. Inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah. Well, speaking very frankly, it's just about survival. Like, again, all the fancy words and all the alphabet soup, it's just about survival. So we were involved with the project. We have a business called Honest Greens Bermuda. HonestGreensBermuda.com. If anybody wants to go check it out, have to take on new customers. Always looking up to sell. HONEST. Sorry. Just kidding. But
put it in the chat.
The premise of our business was we grow produce, organic produce, non-GMO, no toxic chemicals produce hydroponically. And our original premise was to be able to sell produce directly to folks in the hospitality industry. Specifically, we had our eye on, and we're working on a relationship with a large hotel. Now we know what's happened to the hotel industry in Bermuda. It's been hit pretty bad, and there are large entities which I guess they'll be coming back online hopefully 2022, maybe after. I don't know. And tourism industry, I looked at stats for it. I think it was we had a reduction of, was it 98% as far as cruise lines, something like that, and somewhere in the, I don't know, north of 50, I think something like 70% as far as air travel. And so we said, oh well, that's a problem, because we're not even, we have obligations to the bank, and we are navigating a whole bunch of other things, operational getting set up, and this is not a good thing at all. So our pivot, which is not a pivot, it's just survival, was
Survival.
just okay. Yeah, we're going to, I spoke to one of my mates who had started doing deliveries for his business, which is a retail business. And I said, look, I need to be able to deliver stuff to people. I need to make sure we're working from the e-commerce perspective, so we can have transactions electronically online. And we can't, we're going to struggle with our product as far as being able to distribute it through grocery stores, etc., because our produce is super, super fresh, and because we want to be able to distinguish our produce from other stuff that's
Mhm.
out there, and because we're growing varietals that inherently are they don't import well, right? So we have to get it to people, say, within 24 hours, 48 hours. So we managed to get a delivery relationship from my mate. We just do deliveries. We do deliveries on a subscription basis, and so customers just get their weekly delivery. Today was actually delivery day,
Okay.
and that's what we do. And that's giving us at least enough lifeblood to be able to continue to try and meet our obligations.
Mhm.
And we're constantly learning. Okay, who are our customers? I now have insight into who our customers are from a demographic perspective, both age as well as gender. And so it's okay, how do we start marketing to our customers? And so that's nothing, how do we start? And our marketing is just how do we educate our customers about the value that we provide?
Mhm.
It's no more, we can use all these fancy words, but all we're trying to do is survive.
Right.
We provide something that's of value, and it's entrepreneurship of value, and we're trying to exchange it for something else of value, money, right? And we
Right.
just, yeah, and our goal is just to make sure that we have enough to be able to meet our obligations, and we have an external accountant who helps us, who provides the numbers, because
Mhm.
though I may have, you know, a decent perspective on finance and all of that, um, it's so liberating to be able to have somebody else just produce your numbers for you. It's just incredibly liberating. And I don't have capacity, and we don't have capacity to be, sitting there with QuickBooks. We just don't, and that's not the best use of time. And the premise, our basic survival premise is people need to eat. People need to eat good food, and they need to be healthy, and that's what we supply. So, from an, again, I reference Anti-Fragile, that Taleb book, uh,
Yeah.
Nassim Taleb book. And, our premise is that, well, as long as we're selling food, we should be all right. As long as there are people there to eat our food. If there's not people there to eat our food, well, hey, you know, it
Okay.
is what
Well,
it is.
I mean, I feel like I asked you that because I wanted to try our best to use a case study to illustrate some of the things that you were talking about, right?
Sure.
Like when COVID happened, like you said, your original plan or business model was to partner with larger hotels or whatever the case may be. Well, now they don't have any business. At one point it was on lockdown, they were giving all their food away, right? You know, and so how quickly were you able to make this assessment and pivot or survive, if you will? Like, what did that process look like? What was the time frame?
As far as delivery, so it's taken it, we're not, we have to import we have refrigerated cooler bags and all types of supplies that have to come into the island. So it, for that to happen, that takes, to source it and everything else, that was maybe a month. And we made a ton of mistakes, learning opportunities, right? Okay, we insert cooler packs in there now, and we have refrigerated storage and all that type of stuff that we have to, get set up. But you're looking at about for us is maybe a month, maybe a couple of months as far as going from A to B. But then there were things we had to do in our, in the short term just to stay alive.
Right.
Which included, just accelerating our process of fixing stuff that we had going on inside the business, of going there and saying, okay, here's what our cash runway looks like. How do we address that? Do we need to go and get more financing? As you recall, we had also had damage from a storm. So we were dealing with a whole bunch of, like, the real world, right? We have damage from a storm, which messed up our renovations, repairs and stuff. We reached out to, I think, BDC and the government at the time had some sort of, it was money.
Microloan.
Money. We were like, okay, we'll stick our hands up for money. We need money. And it's just because, we had a conversation with the bank, but we were able to continue paying our banking obligations, so we were okay with that. And we had to move product. I didn't get to the point of selling product on the side of the road, but I would have. Well, I wouldn't have, but I've had somebody doing that. You know what I mean? We would do whatever we needed to do to survive. I mean, I think as relevant as this sort of anecdote might be, I think it's more, at least it's relevant for me to talk. I'll talk you through a scenario of a recent client, which would be at least as relevant. So they're a large business and they provide a service, and they have a number of customers, right? A number of large, they're B2B business. What needed to happen with them was, they're generating X amount of dollars. I have to be careful. X amount of dollars, and let's say roughly 45% of their revenue is coming from 2 clients. And with the clients, they have contracts. Now, where I had to help this business, because there's a transaction, they were looking at a potential transaction or all types of things, right? Turnaround, whatever, value architecture stuff, which is, I think, another ebook we have on the website, and folks are welcome to go and download that.
What is it called? Value architecture?
There's an ebook that we have on the Firm Advisory website that talks about value architecture, and looking at the difference between, how the importance of your fixed and variable costs and how that can impact your business model, etc. I'll share. It's freely available on our website. And with this business, while you have really good operators, there's an understanding that just because you get a contract for X amount of dollars doesn't mean that contract's actually adding to your bottom line. In fact, oftentimes that's detracting from your bottom line. And so in a COVID environment, with some of the protocols that are out there, some of their revenues actually bring them underwater, right? It's actually worsening their circumstances. And even though they have a really robust accounting system, accountant in there, etc., they haven't done that level of analysis to understand that they'd be better off firing that customer, as much as it might suck, and let the competitors take it, right? Because that's going to add more money to my bottom line. Literally, not doing that work is going to add money to my bottom line.
I'm sure people are like, "What did you just say? You mean get rid of money coming in?" But that goes back to that kind of assessment, right? That you're talking about.
Yeah. So that's what happens during the valuation process. So always, oftentimes it's about, oh, my business is worth X.
Yeah.
But why is it worth X? Or what are the levers that are there? And that's the value that's what I'm bringing to the table. Whatever alphabet soup, whatever. That's the value that I'm bringing to the table, is that that I'm saying, okay, client, I'm asking questions. You may not have asked or may not have thought to ask, and you may not have been able to put into the appropriate words. And I'm going to be like a dog with a bone for things that are critical. Are those receivables actually worth anything? I've had a client in the past. I've had a few clients in the past, but I'll give an example of a client. And again, I'm not going to name the business, where they had a 7-figure receivable number, which ultimately was worth zero. So on the balance sheet, they look at their book value, and the accountant did everything right. And the book value says that, their receivables are worth that 7-figure number. But then I said, okay, when's the last time you collected on any of this?
How you gonna get it? Yeah. How you gonna get the money?
And who your counterparties? Because I'm actually looking at it and saying, oh, your counterparty is here. Oh, are you sure they're gonna be around in 3 months? Because there's a lot of signs they may not be around. Yeah, but I'm sure I'll get the money. You and everybody else is going to be chasing them. So maybe that number isn't really that number.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, so that stuff becomes, that's the lens, the critical lens through which one has to start looking at one's business.
Mhm.
If one wants to be honest with oneself, right? That's the thing, is my perspective is going to be is going to be it's about giving you transparency from the arm's length perspective. It's not necessarily going to be, it's not necessarily going to make you feel, you're not necessarily going to come out of it and be like, if you want to think that you're doing great, I'm not gonna fluff you, right? That's the conversation I have with everybody. So I'm just not gonna fluff you. Um, but if you want to really have an honest perspective of what's going on in your business, and where there may be opportunities to make changes,
Yeah.
then we could probably have a conversation.
Yeah, and I think like at this point, when we talk about COVID and how we navigate through it and past it, like all of that feeling like you're the bomb when you really aren't, that's like out of the window, right? Like we really are looking at the business to determine if I'm still going to be able to manage or operate this business, like you said, at a profit or not. Like I have to really be honest, or need someone to be honest with me to tell me whether or not this is something that's sustainable or not. If not, what are you doing at the end of the day?
If not, I don't want to drain my savings or whatever reserves I have, and I don't want to negatively impact my family in the future. Like, what are my other options?
Yeah.
Like, I don't care about what my neighbors think. I just don't care.
Yeah.
Whoever, it doesn't matter.
So when you were talking about yourself and using the honest
Sure.
green Bermuda as an example, you mentioned that there were some things that you had to do, right? You had to buy the freezer packs, the actual freezer bags, and all of that, which means that there was cash that needed to be spent. So I guess the question I want to ask you is, in when should you? First of all, we're talking about triage and whether we're going to go or no go. And if you determine that in order for you to go, you have to spend X amount of dollars that you may or may not have, does that impact your decision to go or no go? So it's feasible what your pivot or what your survival option is. It's feasible, but it's going to require additional cash that you
So
don't have.
So the short answer is there's capital out there. There is capital out there, and there's capitalists looking for a home. For me, again, from a very personal perspective, is to reduce external obligations. I was up there on scaffolding. I was up there redoing our roof. I was up about 20 feet, on steel frames. Just what I got to do. Doesn't
Right.
matter whatever fancy school you think you went. You got to do what you got to do. Like, you know what I mean? The the there is capital out there. Um, Obviously talking to folks like the BDC,
Mhm. Thank you.
talking to there is capital out there, but I think the capital is really looking for a safe home, and it's looking for
Yeah.
folks who are going to help, who have a plan, and who
Yeah.
have an understanding. Like, it's not, the whole idea of hitting and hoping and sort of, I'm going to throw some money at it and we'll see what happens. I mean, that's gone. If that was around, that's gone. You've got to have some understanding of what the downside, and you need to understand what the downside is too.
Yeah.
That's very much a situation for me, is I want to understand what my downside is, and then so that way I can enhance my upside, because at least I know my worst case scenario. So at least I can say, okay, if this happens, I'll be selling low quotes, but that's
Yeah.
okay. It's sort of the thing. Yeah.
I mean, you bring up a good point. I tell people all the time, like, plan for your worst case scenario. What does that look like? Because if you know how to get out of that, then chances are you have a good chance at surviving and doing what you need to do for the rest of the business. But I will go back to what you said in terms of BDC. We do have support available. We have this COVID loan grant, microloan program specifically to help people during this time. But we have seen new businesses come, right? New businesses, like you said, there's still people making money. And I think it really does have to do with some of the things that you mentioned. Like, are you able to incorporate delivery, and can you build an online platform to still be able to reach your customer despite not being able to physically come into your establishment? So we still see those, we still fund those ideas. And so I'm just putting it out there for those who may not know that we do have that available. And if you need capital because you're in a scenario where it's a go, you've done your triage and it's a go, but you recognize that there is going to be a need for you to get some things in order to be able to go, then we do have our products available, which you can access on our website at bdc.bm. So
and I would also suggest some of us are eternal optimists, and some of us are pragmatists, whatever. The fact of the matter is that there are folks, there are industries out there that are doing very well.
yeah.
Wearing my firm advisory hat, I've seen some numbers and things, and you hear anecdotal things like folks. I was talking to somebody who's in the real estate space recently, and they said, they've been going gangbusters. Things shut down, and then they've gone crazy. There are folks who have not been able to travel, for example. We saw an anecdote about that, I believe, in one of the local media pieces around folks in the auto industry, right? Apparently, auto sales have been up significantly because there are folks who have just had a cash burning a hole in their pocket, maybe, and maybe they've said, okay, maybe it's time to take another look at our car or look at our vehicle or whatever. People are not traveling to, Marrakesh or wherever people travel. I don't know. I travel to Sandy's, but yeah, just kidding. But because they've got reserves and they'd like to be able to use that for stuff, right? To keep living their lives. So there's still money available on the island, and you just got to sell them goods and services they actually need. And if what you were selling them was not what they needed, maybe you need to repurpose that.
Now's the time to do that work, right? To do exactly what you're talking about. Norman has said or asked, what sort of risk are the holders of this capital willing to take? Or is this a catch them on a good feeling day scenario?
I don't know if I don't know if I can give an answer for that.
Yeah. Norman, Deshaun, I don't know, can we unmute Norman so he can explain?
Here's a quick answer, actually, a quick response. If you're looking for capital, there are institutions out there which provide capital, which are the banks.
Yeah.
And, they can be, they can demand quite a bit. But, the banks, BDC provides a guarantee program, and then if you're talking about folks who provide private capital, that's not a conversation I'd be able to have in a format like this.
Right. So I'll just say from BDC, we recognize that we are taking extreme risks. That's why we're here. And that's why we started our direct lending program, because the banks were not as willing at one point in time to take on risks, especially as it relates to new startup businesses. So while we don't offer a lot, the max amount I think we offer for a medium-sized business right now is $40,000, potentially up to $60,000. But if you need any more than that, like Kumi mentioned, we do offer a guarantee. So we could guarantee 75% of a bank loan, and your bank loan can be upwards of $200,000 or $250,000, and we would guarantee that, which then minimizes the risk to the financial institution, right? Because BDC is signing on for 75% of that, and you may or may not need to provide the difference between the security. But I guess what I'm trying to say is there are things that have been put in place to allow entrepreneurs or business owners to access the capital that they may need to be able to continue doing business. And it's just having that conversation, right? Like Kumi said, if you're looking for debt financing, you would have the conversation with your financial institution, and you would do it sooner rather than later, right? Like as soon as you know, my main revenue source is drying up, you should be going through this process and asking yourself all of these questions. So I definitely would say, okay, I'm looking at another comment. You want to add to that, Kumi? I'll read this. What'd you say, no?
Yeah, I don't have any additional response. You did a great job.
Yeah. So I think what I want to do is just remind people that the document we have been referencing is attached. It's under the handout section, so you can download it. And basically, it is loaded with all of these questions. So I'm sure you're like, well, you may or may not be able to afford to get Kumi to come in and do the assessment on your business. But certainly, I think what you've provided, Kumi, is definitely a first step. like once you start doing these things and asking yourselves these questions, if you're honest with yourself, then surely you should be able to arrive at some sort of decision. But then, there is value in having someone like Kumi come in, because he doesn't know you. He's not trying to be your friend, and he doesn't mind if he hurts your feelings. But having it is, but sometimes you have to be brutal, especially now. Yeah, I was going to say you have to be brutal, especially now, because you need to be looking at your business, at your business model, and what things are working or can work, and where there may be opportunities. You mentioned that some industries are doing well now. Real estate was one of them. Can you give or share any other examples of where you've seen, growth still?
So I don't know real estate to be doing well. I just know anecdotal information, right? It's just yeah. With others, I'd have to be careful because they may be folks where I've actually seen inside the actual numbers.
Yeah.
And
No details. Well, from my perspective, I'll share what I've seen, and when we are getting new requests for support for startup businesses, it's all been sort of, like you said, delivery, online based. Like, people are looking at ways to still reach consumers without necessarily having a physical presence. So the idea may be something that's typical or standard, but the delivery of that idea or how they're are getting to their customer is different, which I think is what we need to look at.
I think that's going to be interesting. I'm curious to see how the actual execution goes for a lot of those businesses. I see a lot of those businesses out there, and from personal experience, as you know, I previously used to have online retail stores back about 20 years ago. Just some small, yeah. Anyway, it's not just about just throwing up a website.
No.
Other stuff that goes in there, and it'll be interesting to see how execution of that goes. Actually, one thing I've seen flourish that makes all the sense in the world to me has been, in the food industry, has been some of these meal prep companies. I've seen a number of those, and I've looked at the numbers in that, and that space, if it's done well and people build their followings and so on and so forth, that looks interesting. Looks interesting.
I would agree with you. And I would also say, going back to something you said earlier, which is you have to give the people what they want. So it's not just setting up an online retail company. You have to be selling what people want and need right now. I remember when COVID first happened, right? I have this, what did I do with it? So I have this is how I put my mask on, right? On this chain. So I'm never without it, right? Because how many times have we been in the car and you leave your mask in the car, you're halfway to where you need to be, and you're like, I gotta go get my mask. So when I got this chain while I was away, and I was like, why can't I find anybody selling the chains? Like, it's just one product, but I'm just saying it's related to something that we all need and have to wear right now. So someone setting up an online business, retail business, that is selling things that are necessities, whether it's PPE, whether it's the travel kits that you use for the airport, they have the seat covers and the fit, like things like that. So if you're in retail and you're like, people are not buying these swimsuits like they used to, what can you sell instead, right? As opposed to that. So maybe it's just changing your current inventory and setting it up where you can have delivery of those products, and whatever the case may be. So I'm just putting it out there that to me is what a pivot or a survival kind of switch up would look like if you're in the retail industry, for example. Why are you staying quiet?
Me? I don't have any feedback. I don't have any feedback. I'm happy to listen.
It's about you. This is your show. So I will say, I think unless you want to share anything else, it is open for questions. I was trying to go through the questions as I received them because it related to what we were talking about at the time. And I don't see any other questions unless I'm missing any. Let's just see. No, I think, can you see what I'm seeing?
I'm not familiar with GoToWebinar, so.
Okay, all right. Well, I think I've gotten all the questions. If there are any other questions, please do share them now. If not, I will let Kumi do some parting words, and encourage businesses to consider what we just discussed today as a way of determining how they should be moving forward during this pandemic and beyond.
Sure. My parting words are, best of luck. And I don't really know what to say. I think there are opportunities out there, and it's just a matter of making sure that we're turning our eye to those opportunities and getting help where needed. I know that's been a huge change for me. That's helped me dramatically in my journey, is reaching out for help. And that help is, I'm not trying to sell my services. That help may be an accountant and maybe a loved one. It doesn't matter. But get help. You don't have to figure all this stuff out on your own. And I know the journey can be really, really challenging for people if you are taking your responsibilities and your obligations seriously. And so I just, best of luck to everybody.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Kumi, for your time. I think I've gotten all the questions. Okay, people are saying thank you. Yep, thanks to BDC and couldn't do it without you. Thanks for that, Michelle. And Megan also said thanks for the shout out, Kumi. She made ton of notes.
It's just honest feedback. I mean, she's,
Yeah.
They've done well with some clients that we worked with back in the day, and there are other folks out there who also provide really good quality services.
Yeah, they do. So for those of you who are looking for maybe accountants or need that sort of bookkeeping support, Abacus is Megan's business, and we work with her. A lot of our clients have worked with her, and they have a great sense of what's required to support small and medium-sized businesses, right? Because it's different. It's not like what an audit or a large firm would need. And so they're really good at that. So I just want to put that out there for those who might need those support. And then thank you, Kumi, again. I know you are extremely busy, but I really do appreciate you making time to share your insight with us, sharing this framework, which is extremely valuable. If you haven't downloaded it, which is in the handout section here, we will make sure that you get it along with the recorded copy of this webinar. And Kumi's information is included in the actual document. And if you have any other questions for him, then feel free, please, to reach out to him if you want to utilize his services. Don't wait till it's too late, because he might find you that money that you didn't know you had. But again, I just want to say thank you so much for your time, Kumi, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you. And Jamila, please share that value architecture ebook with folks. That's actually really, really valuable for folks.
Okay, so we'll include a link to that ebook when we do the follow-up email to everybody. I did put it in the chat, though, a link to your website, but we'll make sure we actually include the link to the book.
I mean, it's free, but it's super useful in my mind.
Yeah. Okay, see that? Thank you. We appreciate that.
You have a great day.
Yeah. Yes, you too.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye.